So, Eamon, you're fresh in from the Central Criminal Court, where you have spent the day in court number 6, where a truck driver, Richard Satchwell, 57-year-old, has gone on trial for the murder of his wife, Tina. The couple lived in Youghal until she was reported missing. But the case opened today. The trial is going to be something that will attract attention. It's one of these ones that seems to have already, got a lot of certainly media attention there today.
Yes, there has been, a lot of media attention.
Yeah.
Richard Satchwell was arraigned yesterday and pleaded not guilty to the murder of Tina Satchwell, his wife, at their address on Grattan Street in Youghal on the 20th of March 2017. So what happened today was the jury were brought in. Judge Paul McDermott introduced himself to the jury, explained what his role was, which is that he's the judge of law, and explained to the jury what their role is, which they are the judges of fact. He did it, in a very, polite way under... it was kind of underdone in a little way. He was giving them an outline of how a trial works.
What to expect,
what to expect, yeah. And he also gave them a warning about, doing a Google search or any kind of media trial, which is standard, I think, these days in any kind of trial like this. He also reminded them, if any of them had any problems with work, that they had to regard this as their full-time job, and that employers are obliged to continue to pay their employees who are working as or who are serving as jurors in a case such as this.
Right.
So this is all kind of standard introduction. And then
how many men or women are on that jury?
It's 12 people. I deliberately wasn't staring at them because you get in trouble for looking at the jury for too long. I forgot to count. I didn't.
They had been selected.
It's quite a mix.
Basically yesterday, which is what happens before these trials begin. So anyway, he tells them what is expected of them, that they're not to look at media, etc., or Google Richard Satchwell, that they're there to sort of judge the case that will be presented before them over the coming, we'll say, weeks for the moment. Did Richard Satchwell is obviously there in the dock. What does he look like? Or
I mean, well, he's just like he's there in the dock. When the trial starts, he's just there, and he's wearing a kind of blue trousers and a blue check shirt.
And who else is in the courtroom? There's obviously the jury. That there's various members of the Gardaí, presume, are there. There's other members of the public who were able to get a seat, were in there as well, and obviously members of the media, and of course both sides' legal teams, like there's junior counsel on both sides as well as their solicitors. So is it feeling like a packed courtroom?
Yeah, it's a busy courtroom. Yeah, no doubt about that. I mean, Court 6 is probably not the biggest, but one of the bigger ones. You do get the sense that it's a busy trial. There's a lot of people kind of paying
milling
attention.
in and out.
Yeah.
So how does it get going, and who opens the case?
So as usual, the opening case is done by the prosecution, by the state, and in this case it's Gerardine Small, who's counsel for the DPP. And it falls to her to open the case in this one. And of course, even before that, like the judge, she gives a little kind of explanation to the jury about how the case came to be, that there's an initial Garda complaint, that there's a Garda investigation that leads to a file to the DPP, which she said is a file people are very familiar with. It's something you hear a lot. And then a book of evidence is put forward. If the DPP decides that, yes, the prosecution could happen, it starts off in the district court and gets sent forward. And of course, now it's in the Central Criminal Court in this case, and reminds the jury that a presumption of innocence exists on the accused person, and that the onus is firmly on the state to establish their case beyond all reasonable doubt. So it's a higher standard than a civil case. So it's a high standard of proof that is needed. And if there's any kind of doubt in their mind, they can't find anyone guilty even when they get to that stage. So there's also a definition of what is murder, like intent to kill or cause serious injury, and that there also must be an unlawful killing. And he went on to explain that there are circumstances when there can be a lawful killing, such as a soldier shooting somebody, while carrying out their duties. You know, and just there was another, like, intention transfers in other cases, which doesn't apply in this one. For instance, if you go to shoot someone and accidentally shoot someone else by mistake, you can't argue, I didn't intend to kill that person, because you intended to kill someone else, so the intent transfer. So this is all explained to jury. It doesn't apply in this case, which was explained to them. And then just it kind of segued straight into, like, who was Tina Satchwell. So she was described in court, born in 1964, married to for 25 years after getting married in the UK on her 20th birthday to Richard Satchwell. They moved to Ireland, bought a house in Fermoy, and then moved to Grattan Street in Youghal in 2016. And she told the jury, you know, you're going to hear she was a very glamorous lady. She had a love of fashion, and that she adored her 2 dogs, Heidi and Ruby the Chihuahua, considered them her children, and that she was a tea lady who was about 5'5" and possibly 8 stone. So that was the very brief pen picture there. Richard Satchwell then is the first mention of him is when he called to the Gardaí in Fermoy on the 24th of March in 2017 at around 7 o'clock that evening. And he spoke to a Garda, Conor Gately, and told him that, look, she had left their home on the 20th of March, 4 days earlier, and that while he didn't have any concerns for her, he still wanted to report that she had left the house, and that she wanted him, or he wanted to say, look, if the guards find her, just to let him know that she's all right. But he wasn't worried about her and didn't think there was any reason to be concerned.
He mentioned the dogs, did he?
Yeah. He said, he'd left her without her dog, and he said, but he explained that was because finding accommodation would have been more difficult. So that kind of and he also mentioned that she had taken 25,000 euro from their savings, which was in a box in the attic. But there was no concern for her safety. So this is just a brief outline, so we didn't actually we didn't get to hear the full statement, which we did later on in the day. So then it's explained by counsel for the state that Gardaí sought to follow up. They made attempts to contact him on the 7th of May. They called to his house and spoke to him, and he repeated kind of the same story, the same narrative, that he expected she would come home to him sooner rather than later, and that he wasn't particularly worried. On the 15th of May then, that year in 2017, he made formal statements which, you know, are going to be heard during the case. So he tells Gardaí in those statements that Tina Satchwell had asked him to go to Dungarvan to get items from Aldi, and including parrot food. And he left around 10 a.m. that morning, goes to Dungarvan, gets the items, comes back in the early afternoon. She wasn't there.
This was on the 20th of March, yeah.
He notices her keys are on the ground and her phone is left behind in the kitchen table, and the dogs are there, which he thought was unusual. And he goes upstairs and he notices there's two suitcases and the money are missing. So no, we hear more later in the case, but eventually, you know, as time passes, he seeks media attention to get assistance. This is after he's been talking to the guards, obviously. He makes an appeal on his wife's whereabouts in the media and a number of outlets. He did TV and radio, and that these interviews are going to feature in evidence in the case, and the jury will see what he said to the media. And that this is very similar to the narrative that he explained to the Gardaí, i.e. that she was gone with the suitcases, and the money was missing, or money had gone with her. So the guards kind of, according to what's going to be heard in court, that in June then that year, that they carried out a search of Grattan Street, the house where they lived, but it was described it wasn't an invasive search. Electronic items are seized, and that the juror is going to hear the results of the analysis of those items, and that the many avenues were pursued by guards, which are going to be again explained to the jury in great detail. Ports and airports were canvassed, coastal and forest searches were carried out, Interpol inquiries, CCTV analysed. Gardaí asked for media assistance in relation to it. House-to-house inquiries were carried out, and lots of witnesses were interviewed. So this has all been explained to the jury, that they're going to hear about all of this stuff. It's going to be explained to them. They're going to hear about all of this. Now, he said, as a result of this investigation by the guards, there were significant inconsistencies arose between what he told the Gardaí, and the jury were told, you're going to hear about all about these inconsistencies. that the Gardaí commissioned a forensic accountant who reviewed the couple's savings and their income and concluded that she didn't have the capacity to have saved anything like the 26,000 euro that was missing.
As he said was missing.
Yeah, which he said in statements were missing. There's CCTV going to be reviewed, including him picking up dole money on the 20th of March at a time when he initially would have said that the jury were told that this is contrary to his narrative, that at that time he was in Dungarvan getting the items she asked for. Data from his phone shows, like, when he stayed in the house until 10 to 1, that he was back from the post office at 11:20, which doesn't fit with his narrative. And at this time, Tina Satchwell was, at the time when Tina Satchwell was supposedly packing the suitcases and taking the money.
Because, of course, they've heard that he said he goes to Dungarvan, he comes home, goes in, finds the phone there, the keys on the floor, the dogs in the kitchen, and goes upstairs and sees his 2 suitcases gone, plus he claims that the money's gone too.
Yeah. And then the jury are also going to hear about how Gardaí found an advert where he was trying to get rid of a chest freezer for free on Dun Deal on the 31st of March 2017, and he'd previously offered this to a cousin. They're also going to hear about an email taken from a laptop sent on the 20th of March at 20 to 11 that morning to an organisation, International Monkey Rescue, saying that he was trying to buy 2 monkeys from this organisation, or trying to take them or acquire them from them, that he was encountering certain difficulties in this carrying out. And the email, it was, it references how he put a lot of work into it and that his wife is going to leave him if this doesn't go through, and that the jury are going to hear all of this. They're kind of their lifestyle, where they used to regularly go to car boot sales, like all over, Cork County, and I think in even further afield as well. And they'd take place on certain Sunday mornings. They'd set up a stall and sell items. Tina would buy stuff as well. Gardaí speak to a number of people, of attendees at these car boot sales, and what Richard told them about her disappearance. And the jury are going to hear that one narrative he gave to people at some of these car boot sales was that she'd contracted a respiratory issue, had lost 4 stone, and had gone to the UK to stay with her sister. But the jury are also going to hear that it appears that he was also selling her items, clothing and footwear, shortly after her disappearance at these car boot sales as well.
Mm-hmm. So in this opening, which is essentially, the jury are hearing what they will hear essentially from the opening case of the prosecution, it jumps significantly then to a period of time, more recent times, when all of a sudden he is arrested and they go into his home again in Youghal.
Yeah, so again, this is part of the opening statement on behalf of the State's Council. So on the 10th of October 2023, a Garda operation took place. It had 2 aspects to it. One of those was the arrest of Richard Satchwell, and the other was an invasive search of the house, as it was termed. And he was after he was arrested, he was told by Gardaí that his house was going to be invasively searched. He was brought to Cove and is detained and interviewed there. And the jury are going to see all these interviews and what he told the Gardaí, in which he effectively maintained the same narrative that he had for the previous 6 years, that he went to Dungarvan and she was gone on his return. So the next day he was released from Garda custody. The search was continuing. It was described, the search, as being systematic, extensive and invasive by a multidisciplinary team that included a forensic archaeologist, scenes of crime investigators from another jurisdiction, and a cadaver dog. And then later on the 11th October, so this is the day after he was arrested, this is what the jury had been told, the decomposed human remains were found at the house, wrapped in black plastic sheeting in a 3-foot grave dug underneath the stairs in the sitting room and cemented over. And those decomposed remains would be ID'd as Tina Satchwell. So we're going to hear from the jury, rather, or I'm sure we'll all be there, we'll hear it as well, from the pathologist, Dr. Margaret Bolster, who, as it was put, was unsurprisingly not able to determine a cause of death because of the decomposition of the remains that were found. And on the foot of this discovery, then the Gardaí get a rearrest warrant. He's arrested at 2 p.m. on the 12th of October, and he's taken again to Cove and interviewed. And they're going to the jury are going to hear all these statements and the interviews that he gives. And the brief synopsis that the jury were told, that this includes how Richard Satchwell then tells Gardaí, he changes his story. He tells them on the 20th of October, he got up early, as he normally does every day. He went out to the shed at the back. There's plumbing, a washing machine or something like that. And he comes back in around 9 a.m. and sees Tina at the bottom of the stairs with a chisel scraping plasterboard he'd put up, wearing a dressing gown. He said to her, "What are you doing?" And she flies at him with a chisel. He loses his footing, falls backwards, and she's on top of him trying to stab him in the head with the chisel. And so to protect himself, there was a belt he was able to access, and he held the weight of her off him with his belt. And during this, as he protected himself as best as he could by holding her weight, in a matter of seconds, she falls limp. And then he says then that a day later, he transfers it to a freezer in the shed. And then he eventually takes her, wraps the body in black plastic sheeting and puts her in the grave and cements over it that he has dug in the house. And then there was a number of very extensive interviews. They ask a lot of questions about, like, they're again questioning his story. Again, the emails of the monkey rescue organization comes up, the timing on that, because again he mentions that his wife will leave. He says in the outline, like, he tells Gardaí that that Tina had been violent to him. And again, there's going to be other evidence about his movements and about people he spoke to in the time after she went missing. And this includes, they're going to hear evidence from members of a GP practice that both him and Tina had been attending. And that pretty much wrapped up kind of the opening statement.
So basically the jury have been told, I mean, there is that big jump we see there of 6 years between the initial, when he reports her missing, and what he says and statements he makes to the Gardaí. And the jury will see sort of more detailed versions of that, including any recordings that are available from the police station. And they're also going to see then that sort of dramatic change in his narrative, which comes out 6 years later when he's arrested after the remains are found in that house. And no doubt there's going to be a lot of evidence given by scene of crime people who were there during that search when those remains were found under the floorboards of the house, and evidence around the freezer and what he has said. But they will then see, sort of 6 years later, this new narrative that he presents, that there was an argument, a scuffle, and that basically he's saying in his police interviews after the remains are found that she sort of attacks him.
Yeah.
So after the prosecution sort of closed their opening, which is a summary of what will be heard in the coming weeks by the jury, who's the first witness that's called?
So the first witness who came to the stand, or brought to the stand today, was Garda Conor Gately. He was the community guard in Fermoy who took the initial statement from Richard Satchwell that he was concerned about his wife who had left their house in Youghal. Again, this is the kind of the more detailed version of the briefer version that was already, that was given to the jury, and explained to him that it's kind of repetitive, I suppose, just explain that.
But more detail.
He'd gone away, yeah. And again was saying he was certain he was okay and that she'd left and he was allowed to do so, and he just wanted to know she was okay. And he was asked about social media and said she didn't use it. And the guard was asked about, how did he present? How did Richard Satchwell present? And he said, as you'd expect, he was a matter of fact. He wasn't overly emotional. He kind of behaved as I would have expected him, in taking him at face value. And he said, look, if he had any concerns, now he told Richard Satchwell if he had any concerns about her safety, and he should report her missing. And what had brought him to Youghal, he was explaining the reason why, he had reported in Fermoy and not Youghal, was that he'd been with her family that day, who were from Fermoy, and had been up to see them, and then had gone into the guards to kind of explain his concern, but that she had left.
And he was claiming at this stage that she was 4 days gone missing, that it was March 20th. Yeah. He'd gone to Dungarvan on that errand, came back and found her missing. Yeah. So it's 4 days after this when he goes into the Garda station.
Yeah. And again, there was a little bit of cross-examination from counsel for Satchwell, Brendan Grehan, who asked to explain, just about, how these things work, about how you record it on Pulse, and how, Youghal Gardaí would become aware of it. And he asked, was it unusual? And Garda Gately said, yeah, it was quite unusual. He says, but it does happen. And he agreed that, yes, he had kind of discussed it with Satchwell and said to him that, he probably should make a missing persons report at some stage if he continued to be kind of concerned about her. And so the next guard then who was called to the stand was an officer who had been tasked to follow up on the report from Youghal. And he was on, he tried then for a number of times then to call to number 3 Grattan Street, but Richard Satchwell, as a truck driver, a delivery man for a tire company, he'd work long hours, he'd be up quite early. So the guard had missed him a couple of times, and when he did speak to him on the 2nd of May, he explained again. She hadn't returned home. She explained that she'd taken the clothes and cash. He wasn't particularly worried. He appeared calm. And again, that this officer advised him to make a missing persons report, and again, he explained that he'd made contact with Tina's family in Fermoy in the UK to see if they had heard from her. While he said he had no welfare concerns about her, he also said then he tried to message her on Facebook, but there was no recent activity and he didn't get a reply. And again, I think there was on a second occasion then he advised them to make a missing persons report. There was some cross-examination. The guard, confirmed that he didn't enter the house. He said that they did a social welfare check to see if she was signing on somewhere else, and found that she wasn't claiming any benefits or on social protection. Again, he said that Richard Satchwell had told him he wasn't particularly over-concerned about Tina, that she didn't drink or smoke, or that she'd taken cash, and had no concerns in that regards, and expected her to return sooner or later as she cleared her head, as it was put. And then the same officer, Thomas Keane, he ended up being the family liaison. So for in 2019, 2020, he was often in contact with Richard Satchwell in that role, and had been in the house a couple of times around 2022.
Was there evidence given about anything that was said in the aftermath as the years went on? Was there evidence given on what Richard Satchwell would have said? Did the cops keep going back and checking?
There was, because there was another. There was. Obviously, they came back again. There was the next witness after that was Garda James Butler from Youghal Garda Station, and he took a statement on the 11th of May. And he had been asked by management or whatever to take a missing persons report. And when it was complete, Richard Satchwell handed him Tina's Samsung phone. And he read over the statement. He was given evidence, all the kind of the procedural stuff about, the part about it, saying this is all true, I'm of sound mind, and agreed that it was accurate, and signed it. And he explained about how they met, and about he'd met his wife Tina in 1989 in Coal Hill, which is a village near Leicester where he was originally from. And then in 1989, the couple moved to Fermoy for a year, stayed with a sister of hers. Then they were back to England. They got married when she was 20 in Oldham, and then moved back again to Ireland for a while in Fermoy and Glenworth, and then back to England again. And then they were back in Fermoy, and there were one point they were in Cork City. And then they eventually bought a house in Fermoy and then sold that before moving to Youghal in 2016. Now, at one point, he had stolen a checkbook and he got into trouble financially and with the police, but had come back to Ireland. At one point, he was living in England himself, this in 2003, but that he then came back and dealt with that. The house in Fermoy they sold for €120,000, which they kept in cash because they didn't want to affect their social welfare money at the time. And after buying the house in Youghal, they had this 26,000 left, which was stored in a box in the attic, which we've heard already in the opening statements. And then in this particular statement, he gives some background about Tina Satchwell's mental health. So Richard Satchwell in his statement says that she'd become more volatile and would lash out rather than harm herself. And and that he was giving an example of, being in great form at a car boot sale, and that he got a takeaway from Apache one night, was doing a few jobs about the house the next day. And this is actually the day then when she went missing. He came back and she was gone. And he was explaining, it was the same narrative again about the how she went missing.
Yeah.
He talked about when he went to see her family in Fermoy, and they hadn't seen her. He said he'd been sure she would have been there, and he said his world fell out from under him, and that that's when he went to the Gardaí to Fermoy to express his concern that his wife had left, and he wanted to find out if she all right. And he said he didn't have any idea of what kind of clothes she could have taken, but she had so many. To his knowledge, she didn't have a passport. She had a provisional driver's license at one point, but thought she might have lost it, and an email she doesn't use. He gave Gardaí the phone. It didn't have a PIN, even though it was registered to him. And he then had another statement he gave, but this was about releasing photographs to Crime Call and other media. And that was part of him giving permission, saying that he had permission for them to pass on these photographs.
Mm.
And
so the jury heard two things about that money, yeah? They first of all heard that he has claimed on the 24th of March, when he goes to Fermoy to report her missing as such, although not officially. He just sort of goes in to cite his concerns that this money exists, but it's gone. He claims she's gone with 2 suitcases and the money. But the jury have also been told that they will hear from a forensic accountant that money didn't exist.
Yeah, that's correct, yeah.
Yeah, okay.
So this is obviously going to be
part of the evidence during the trial.
As the case moved on.
Yeah.
So the final witness that they got to today was a detective Garda Aidan Dardis, and he took statements he took a number of statements in May, June and July in 2017. And again, he talks about, I gave up my family for her. She's my whole world in one of these statements, where he also talks again, it's the same narrative that we've heard. He again talks about their lifestyle, how they would go to car boot sales, that, he'd sell clothes and footwear, bric-a-brac, and she'd buy stuff. After she disappeared, he went to see different relatives to see if they had contact with her. Again, there was other little bits of kind of explaining on the day that he was going to Dungarvan to do the shopping, and when he came back, she wasn't there. He was saying he collected dole money at the time, or in the post office. He also lit candles for her dead parrot Pearl, and 3 more for the 2 dogs and for Tina. And he said he didn't know what time he was in Aldi that day. He didn't wear a watch. Tina didn't ring him, which in hindsight was unusual, he thought. And that when he came back, she was gone. And then for the next couple of days, he didn't go anywhere. And then on the Friday, he went to the doctor in Fermoy, because that's where they're registered with a GP. And then he called her members of her family, and he thought she would be there. He was convinced she would be there, and was upset that he wasn't there. He told Gardaí he didn't think she would do harm to herself, because she's too vain and that she loves herself. And again, he talked more about different relatives he went to see. And he also said, he's helped the Gardaí with anything that they've asked. And he talked about her volatility in this statement as well, about how, prior to moving Youghal, she'd say she hated me, and then the next minute in my arms and telling him that she loved him. He talked about her love of secondhand shops, and but also how she could suddenly get angry out of nowhere. And there was, for instance, one day, she told him that she had wasted 28 years of her life on him. He said he was a bit of a walkover, that she wore the trousers in the relationship, and then she'd be ecstatic then when she got a designer dress in a secondhand shop for €10, and it'd be like it never happened. And then the next day again, she would hate Youghal. But he said she had suffered a lot of tragedy in her life in the previous 11 years. That at the death of brother, that she was close to when they were children, but not as adults, that her mood swings got worse. He says even after 2 weeks when they first met, she gave him a black eye. And he said she might slap him once a week, but there would be real violence 3 or 4 times a year. He'd suffer bloody injuries. He said he was scarred from being hit with a lamp. And he said he took her abuse because she was in pain from life, and that she isn't a bad person, and he didn't want to paint her that way. he also spoke to relatives who told him that, Gardaí had asked if he had ever been violent towards her. And when he heard this, he felt sick and said that he'd give his life for her and he just wants her back. And he said, he'd given up his life. He said he'd been destroyed by this. I want Tina back. The fact that he had to give up his family, he says, my mother hated the Irish. I had to give up my family as one of these things, he said. And then there was other kind of procedural statements given where he was given permission to access her medical records. And at one point, he left a key of the house with the Gardaí, which he said he wanted them to have in case she came back when he wasn't there, that she'd be able to get in. And then there was a kind of a final statement where he said the Gardaí returned the key to him, and he stated that he didn't believe guards had accessed his home with that key at any stage. And that was it for the day, and it's back in tomorrow.
So the state are saying that Satchwell murdered his wife Tina. They don't have a cause of death, and I'm sure the detail of that and the autopsy, etc., will be detailed to the jury. But nonetheless, they're saying that Satchwell murdered his wife, and having placed her body in black sheeting and then into the shallow grave, he covered it over with cement before reporting his wife as missing to the Gardaí. That's the sort of the summary of the case. And the jury will be back tomorrow to hear further evidence.
There'll be more. And there's at least 100 witnesses, apparently. So they're talking about the trial lasting 5 to 6 weeks.
5 to 6 weeks, yeah. Okay. Thanks, Eamon.
Always a pleasure, Nicola.
I'm Nicola Tallant, and you're watching Crime World, a podcast about criminals, drugs, and the underworld in Ireland and across the globe. Make sure you subscribe to our channel and turn on notifications so you can be the first to watch all our latest episodes. You can also listen wherever you get your podcasts.